forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten as we return to weekly episodes here of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Dace. If we're weekly, that means the season is nigh, and that also means I'm joined by my partner here. Good to see you, co-host Aaron McIntyre. How are you, brother?
Doing well. I'll say it again. This is my favorite time of the year. A year ago, last year on this program, we were reviewing Phil Steele's magazine in anticipation of the following week's Big Ten schedule announcement, not knowing that about a week and a half later, the entire house would be dropped on our heads. And so this year feels a lot different. I was telling you the other day, Steve, it's exciting to get back to 2 episodes a week or one of each program here on this channel.
Indeed, it's more exciting than it was a year ago, Aaron, but it might even be crazier.
I know.
It might even be crazier. Put it this way. Big Ten football, we're going to start our Bigger Five, or a Big Five rundown here on Bigger Ten. Big Ten football media days are going to be 4th. The return of arguably the best returning basketball player in our conference is going to be number 5. Like, if we have time, we'll get to it. That's how insane this is right now. So let's begin with the return of Realignment. Poor former Iowa athletics director Bob Bowlesby, now the commissioner of the Big 12, and I knew Bob many a year ago fairly well when he was the AD at Iowa. Bob is smart, straight shooter, very well accomplished administrator. It's why he's had so many high-profile jobs. But little did he know that all those months he was working quietly and privately with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Greg Sankey was getting ready to do him like Brutus did Caesar at the gates to the Roman Senate. A little et tu brute from Bob Bowlesby and the Big 12 last week in a move that will have ramifications and reverberations here in the Big Ten Conference as well for sure. And that's Texas and Oklahoma, apparently back in December after the season, approached the SEC about leaving the Big 12 and joining their ranks. They've been working on this edition ever since. For some odd reason, it got leaked to the Houston Chronicle during SEC football media days last week. It's one of the few times in this day and age I can think of, whether it's news or sports, where we're just like completely shocked. No one saw it coming. No one heard about it. You know, a lot of times we're shocked about things we heard that just ended up being different or bigger than we thought, right? It's rare that the story in and of itself is just a complete shocker, and yet this was. And I think to me, there's a group getting off easy here, and that's ESPN. So for those of you that have been following Bigger Ten through its various iterations, you know that this podcast originally began as an outreach after the first realignment a rotisserie realignment league that we had 10 years ago. And me and my former partner, John Miller, were doing a show at the time. And 10 years ago, the Big 12, several of its teams wanted to break away, Texas, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. They were going to break away and join the Pac-10. But ESPN didn't want them to go to a network or to a channel that was associated with Fox Sports Network, their rival. They also didn't want to create an entirely new rights fee structure, so they ponied up a lot of money to keep the Big 12 together. Notice this time, Aaron, that ESPN is eerily silent. Why? It's because they own the SEC network. It's because they're also about to become the exclusive partner of the SEC and in place of CBS. They're going to be every bit, if not more, in bed with the SEC than Fox is with the Big Ten and the Big Ten Network. And that's who I think is really driving this. ESPN is worried about playoff expansion, the cost of maintaining its rights foothold on that. They have a limited window here between now and 2025 to exclusively negotiate. What better way to come up with the extra revenue it will take in order to hold on to that than to turn the Southeastern Conference into an absolute monster? And that's what I think is driving this more than anything else. And then it's just a matter now. I think the future of college football as we have known it rests in the hands of what the Big Ten will do next, Aaron. I think, does the Big Ten believe that this was an organic event? That Texas and Oklahoma have long wanted out of the Big 12, and they finally found the soft landing spot. The SEC is just very fortuitous, and they took advantage of it. I think if the Big Ten thinks that that's the situation, it may act a certain way. It may not expand at all. It may expand modestly. But if the Big Ten, as it says right there on the crawler underneath me, if it believes the SEC is seeking some kind of collegiate sports hegemony here, that it's stepping into this breach now that the NCAA is basically all but dead, that if you look at the timing of this, Aaron, shortly after the SEC signed off on a playoff format of 12 teams and 6 at-large teams, it expands its league to the point that it could get 5 to 6 of those teams every single year. If the Big Ten believes that this is the SEC's attempt to essentially replace the NCAA, then I think you'll see the Big Ten respond a whole different level. I think you're looking at AAU schools. That's that Association of American Universities, that very prestigious research rights grant that league that all the Ivy League schools are in. Every Big Ten school other than Nebraska is in. And I think you'll see the Big Ten try to make a massive play if they think that's what the SEC is trying to do here. So we'll get into the Big Ten side of things here in just a few minutes. But first and foremost, just your overall big picture read of this story.
Yeah, so there's multiple levels to this, as anyone listening or watching well knows. The moral level is something we talked about on a different show, on another show, and I find it appalling, but I'll try to keep it to kind of the competitive and the business side of things here. I tweeted out the other day a GIF of when Oklahoma and Texas made their joint announcement. I tweeted out a GIF of Surtur, the fire monster from Ragnarok, saying, "But Ragnarok has already begun. There's nothing you can do to stop it." Because in a lot of ways, if the SEC really is seeking hegemony here, even if the Big Ten's play is to then return in kind, what we're seeing, let's just be honest here, is the Ragnarok, the destruction of some of the most beloved characters, if you will, and some of the most hallowed grounds of college football as we know it. Because that's what it's really, we're talking about consolidation here. Consolidation is more efficient. You know what consolidation also means? Jim down the block doesn't have his job anymore, and the Jones next door, they're looking for a new place or a new job as well. Consolidation usually means the elimination of a lot of things. And that's because, as it stands right now, and there's a number of reasons for this, but if we go to super conferences, one of the main drivers, if you will, economic drivers for a lot of the smaller schools, group of 5 schools, and then below, are the ability to play the big boys and get paid a lot for it. It's been a good, I don't know what you think of this, Steve, but I would say for the FCS level and then for the group of 5 level, it's been a good kind of farm system for the big boys, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's created a ton of opportunities for a lot of minorities, let's just be honest about that, who would otherwise not get them. A lot of that is driven by, again, the ability to play the big boys and get paid for it. Another thing for the group of 5 anyway is the television money. They were on thin ice, to say the least, before. And now if we go to super conferences like what is being proposed, the chances that they are able to stick around, at least the way they are now, drops precipitously. There's a lot more where that comes from and a lot more tentacles to follow, but eventually this will mean some sort of a Ragnarok for college football as we know it, because it's essentially going to turn into NFL light or some sort of minor league for the NFL. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing for the tradition of college football, in my opinion. and it's certainly not a good thing for all of the opportunities that it's created. The things that we were actually talking about on this show last year, trying to save that season of college football, I think we're talking about its very existence now, and that should be alarming to a lot of people. I think the other part of this as well is what you brought up, obviously, with ESPN. See, ESPN is trying to exist in the market that it wants, not the marketplace that exists right now. The marketplace that it wants is the one that it was born in, the cable marketplace, the cable television marketplace, where you sell people packages and then add-ons to those packages for sports and entertainment and things like that, and charge them $80, $90, $100 a month, something along those lines, in order to cover all of your costs, and then you can sell advertising and things of that nature on top of that. That model is collapsing with every cable cut, with every subscription to YouTube TV or Hulu TV, or name any subscription streaming service that can undercut by $30 to $40 a month the cost of cable, HD cable packages. That marketplace is going kaput, meaning also that the location of your schools, if they are in large markets like Rutgers or Maryland, with New York and Washington, D.C. respectively, for those of us in the Big Ten, your market doesn't really matter anymore. It really doesn't. The number of engaged viewers you can actually bring in, that's what's going to matter the most down the road. ESPN, though, is trying to avoid that marketplace, and by increasing the value of the properties that they already hold, like the SEC network and the ACC network. So those are a couple of the major factors I see playing in here. I know we talked about, and I don't want to step on your toes here, we talked about just today that we're taping this, the fact that the rest of the conferences may or may not actually give their seal of approval to the expanded playoff. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to get into that a little bit, Steve.
Yeah, we can do that now. In fact, Penn State's listed here, but let's get into the rumors and stories of some of the reactions, okay? So I'll just go through several of the scenarios that I have heard or seen reported. John Borton, who is the editor of the Wolverine, that's the Michigan side on Rivals, says that he has heard that, and John actually had this story a few weeks ago that he heard another round of conference realignment was coming. I just didn't kind of take it seriously and wasn't sure he was right about that. Turns out he was. He's hearing that the ACC is heavily attempting to court Penn State to leave the conference. You mentioned the story that came out this morning from Nicole Auerbach at The Athletic, and I think we learned last year that Nicole is, shall we say, fairly cozy with Big Ten decision makers. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, she seemed to get the exclusive from what's going on in the Big Ten Conference before anybody else did. She had a story out at The Athletic today, and this just sounds like a Barry Alvarez move. And if you watched Big Ten Football Media Days, our Commissioner Kevin Warren made sure to let everybody know that Barry Alvarez is now helping him actually do his job. All right? But that her story is that the other conferences are now very hesitant about going ahead and expanding the playoff. And that essentially their plan is, if the SEC is bound and determined to create a league that's, from a branding and revenue standpoint, that much better than everybody else, then just let them feast on each other then. Don't expand a system where now Texas and Oklahoma can finish 4th, 5th, 6th in a conference and still be in the college football playoff. That will just keep it at 4. And at best, the SEC will get 2 teams out of it. And if they want to do their own thing and be at a different level than everybody else, then just turn them against one another, Lord of the Flies style. That story was out there. And then I'll tell you, some of the things we're hearing on the Michigan side of things is that the Big Ten is looking, and Adam Rittenberg has also reported the Big Ten will not expand with anyone that's not associated with that AAU. And the reason why that matters is for all the money that's involved in athletics, folks. The money in research grants and everything else that they're doing on the academic level is just next level. Okay, and so that the Big Ten is interested in not abandoning its fellow AAU member institutions. Well, one of the things we're hearing from the Michigan side of things is that the Big Ten is looking at making a splash by raiding the ACC. And you have 4 AAU universities in that conference: North Carolina Duke, Georgia Tech, and Virginia, and that the latter 2 have already indicated an interest in joining with the Big Ten. So that's just a collection of the stories and various rumors and everything that are going around in response to this. Your thoughts?
I would just say probably the best case scenario of this would be the threat and then the follow through on the threat to keep the playoff at 4 teams. If you want to keep somewhat of the status quo about the competitive balance and then the geographic balance of our current system, that would probably be the best way to go. Because Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, and Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, as you mentioned earlier, they were working together on expanding the playoff. Now, the last 6 months, they've been working together on expanding on the plan to expand the playoffs, with Sankey knowing full well he was about to raid the Big 12. The dude sitting across this table at him, he was about to basically nuke his conference.
You can see where there might be some lack of trust issues where the SEC is concerned in the other leagues, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that is, and Greg Sankey before as well, he's been pretty against expanding the playoff. And then there was kind of a change in tune this the last few months. Oh yeah, sure. We're fine with the 12-team playoff. I wonder if he knew something. He probably did. So I think that's a really effective leverage play if you kind of want to keep the nuclear football away from the SEC. The nuclear football or just hegemony in college football away from the SEC. Just say, because all of the other conferences have to give their blessing to expand the playoff, just say we're not going to expand. As you noted, Steve, you can all just kind of bugger yourselves to death all year and get a maximum of 2 teams into the playoff. How do you like them apples? I think that's probably the best thing. There's also the rumor as well about Penn State potentially leaving the Big Ten for the ACC. That's not as crazy as people think, especially if we've got the divisions. I think those are still going away. But if I'm Penn State, I have this massive stadium with a massive alumni base and a division with Michigan and Ohio State.
Right.
And a conference with Michigan and Ohio State. That makes no sense. Now, I still think it's about a 10% chance that the specific scenario that I'm about to posit would come true. But if the SEC was somehow able to get Clemson, Penn State would be foolish. If the ACC still had Florida State and still had the majority of their core teams, Penn State would be foolish not to pursue joining the ACC because they're one of maybe 2 or 3 top dogs in that conference. I don't see that exact scenario happening. I think if Clemson jumps ship, then there's going to be 2, 3, 4 other ACC schools that will jump ship as well out of the ACC. But if that scenario came through, I would seriously consider leaving the Big Ten if I'm running Penn State. I don't think that's a good thing. Aaron McIntyre doesn't think that's a good thing. I would just consider that.
Something else when you want to consider the Big Ten's next moves, we mentioned now a couple of times already, this association of American universities. All right, this is every school in the Ivy League. Every school in the Big Ten but Nebraska belongs to this. Nebraska is the lowest rated academic school in our league, and it's 133rd. So as you can see right there, it would actually be one of the better rated academic schools in the Big 12. 9 schools in the Pac-12 belong to this. Notre Dame belongs to this. 4 schools in the ACC belong to this. So for those of you wondering, why doesn't the Big 10 just go ahead and scoop up what's left of the Big 12? I think we learned again last year that our league is one of the few where the presidents are still ascendant, where the athletics people are still answering to them to some degree. Now, the presidents don't have the kind of power in our league they had in the 70s and 80s before Delaney, but they certainly sure as hell have a lot more power than what you see in the SEC, for example. Here's the current academic ratings of the remaining Big 12 schools. So TCU and Baylor both rank in the top 80. That's great. The problem is they're both private religious schools, and they're non-AAU related. So we don't have a private religious school in the Big Ten. So there's not really a cultural fit there. Well, then why do we want Notre Dame? Well, because they belong to that AAU just like we do. Kansas and Iowa State are the 2 highest rated public universities left in the Big 12, and you can see by a long shot. They're like way ahead of everybody else. The problem you have with Kansas is that this is really all from a revenue standpoint driven by football. And their football program, this is the worst FBS level program probably since Northwestern's a terrible era of the 1980s. And so what do you do with that? if you're the Big Ten. And not to mention, well, they're great in basketball. They're also scandal-ridden in basketball right now as well. Iowa State actually has so if you're looking for brands, you're not looking for TV markets anymore. You're looking for brands because most people are getting this digitally to some extent. When you look at the fact Iowa State has the third largest on-campus stadium now in the Big 12, could they surprisingly actually, in terms of how many people could they get to buy an online product to watch? That's what we're really talking about now, right? Yeah, engagements. If you've got the third largest on-campus facility for football, does that mean that you actually have a superior fan base when it comes to engagements than, say, even Oklahoma State, who's had a lot more historical success? There's no clear-cut answer there for the Big Ten, Aaron. And so that's why I wonder if, going back to what we said before, if trying to make a bigger splash by raiding the ACC or just deciding to stand pat, but just keep the playoff at 4 teams and just let the ACC feast on itself, if the Big Ten might choose those options instead. I don't think anybody knows right now.
Yeah, it's very hard to say, and it depends on how much, if the Mark Schlissels of the world not much respect due. Let's just put it that way. If the Mark Schlissels of the world are making these decisions, hang on to your butts, guys. If they're actually in consultation with people like Barry Alvarez, that you mentioned earlier, if they're actually relying on some football minds like that and kind of delegating this out to some extent while setting some certain parameters around this, like Rittenberg is reporting only going for AAU members, that could be a better scenario. I still, though, maintain that the best scenario of all of this is standing pat and keeping the playoff where it is, because as discussed earlier, the expansion, the realignment, to the degree that we're talking here, where we're eliminating multiple conferences, Power 5 conferences, that's not going to be a good thing.
Just to play this out, let's play out just to prove your point. Let's play this out. So let's say that the Big Ten, well, Steve, they got a grant and rights in the ACC till 2036. Nobody cares about grant and rights, guys. Contracts are for suckers and people that can't afford good attorneys. Okay, and the Big Ten attorneys don't care. Just like Oklahoma and Texas are, I promise you, planning on playing in the SEC next season. That's why this is all out there right now. They're trying to destabilize the league so they don't have to stick around here for another 4 years. So contracts aren't covenants. They're not constitutional amendments. They're binding to people like us that can't afford massive, Alan Dershowitz level legal representation. But for conferences that can, they don't care. So let's say the Big Ten could woo Virginia, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and Duke. You have to assume then the SEC would then try to come in and maybe add a Florida State and a Clemson. Fair?
Yep.
Maybe even a Miami. Okay. What happens to Wake Forest? They've been to a lot of bowl games recently. They've been a modestly successful program for the last decade and a half under a couple different coaches now, Jim Grobe and Dave Clawson. What happens to them? What happens to NC State? They had a top 25 team last season. What happens to them? Where do they go? Everybody's talking about how consolidation may hurt MAC or Group of 5 level programs, and you're right about that. Have you considered what it will do to actually successful Power 5 programs? Let's delve a little further. The new commissioner of the Pac-12 said at their media days earlier this week that they've really got to put football and football revenue first in any decisions they make right now. Okay. What does that leave Washington State? Small stadium there on the Palouse. They've had a lot of success over the last couple of decades, but how much money do they really generate for the league? What's Purdue generate in football? In the Big Ten? We're really getting down to a Darwinian mindset here, when this is really supposed to be about providing educational opportunities first and foremost for young people. These programs go away, all those scholarships go away. So I think that's just kind of one, I think, completely plausible scenario to play itself out based on what you just said.
Yep, and I just think taking a step back, not just for the sport, but for the people involved with the sport, what are we really talking about here? Football is played by players. Players are human beings. Players are human beings with histories, backgrounds, and who have this tremendous opportunity in front of them. And what we're doing with consolidation is eliminating the outlets for those opportunities. That's what will eventually happen. Because contrary to what a lot of people believe, this is not magic. There are still economic forces at play, and there are still business forces at play here. But the main purpose of this entire sport is being lost. And it's being lost for just craven greed and, as you mentioned, a Darwinian mindset here.
All right. So that's why a lot of this begins and ends now with what does the Big Ten do next? Do they think that the SEC is attempting to take control and take over college football? If they do, I think the Big Ten will act one way. And they're really the only league with the wherewithal to truly challenge it. If they don't, then I think they will stand pat or create some kind of scheduling alliance like Delaney almost had years ago with the Pac-12, where we play them rotating wise and non-conference events, as part of our, kind of kissing cousins arrangement we've had from the beginning of the Rose Bowl. Or maybe they go ahead and save Iowa State and Kansas, the AAU members, from the now disintegrating Big 12, something like that. Mm-hmm. But if they think that the SEC is truly attempting to plant a flag here on the sport, then I think you look at the Big Ten will look to go big and probably look to disintegrate the ACC in response. So now we wait and see. What does the Big Ten think? And they'll show us in the weeks and months to come. Well, let's actually talk some football, shall we? We did have Big Ten football media days.
No kidding.
Last week. That did occur, by the way. The Buckeyes, a unanimous favorite to win the Big Ten football championship again. That should surprise. No sentient carbon-based life form here within the 9 realms. You look at the rest of Big Ten football media days, I thought it was as friendly and forthcoming as I think Jim Harbaugh has ever been. Admittedly, though, that's a low bar. PJ Fleck was really pouring it on thick to sell his team, like he was trying to raise expectations on them. Scott Frost, I thought, looked like he wanted to be anywhere absolutely other than there. But what else stood out to you?
Just how little stood out to me, actually.
This became really anticlimactic after the Oklahoma-Texas announcement came out that day.
That's precisely where I was going. There really wasn't a whole heck of a lot that I took out of this. There were no big, whoa, that's kind of a head scratcher moment. Maybe I'm just getting old, or maybe it's just another run of the mill type of Big Ten media days. But there really wasn't much of anything that stood out to me. I guess the PJ Fleck. I listened to that conference, the PJ Fleck thing. I guess that's a good tactic, trying to raise expectations for your team. Boy howdy, I don't know. I would still be kind of tempering expectations if I were him just a little bit, having read some of the preview magazines that you thankfully subsidized for me by virtue of giving me your copies. There are a lot of pundits who are pumping the brakes just a little bit on Minnesota this year. So I guess maybe that was probably the biggest thing that stood out to me. Otherwise, it was kind of a run-of-the-mill Big Ten media days, which this year is fine after what we had last year.
You make an excellent point. Come to think of it, we've come not to bury the run-of-the-mill Big Ten football media days, but to praise them.
Yep.
Maybe we all needed no drama and Kevin Warren do a yuck it up, please like me presentation. Maybe we deserved that after whatever the hell melodrama that was last year. You know what? I have a totally different read on this now. Thank you very much. That's an epiphany you gave me. All right, we got to throw this hoop note in, all right? If it's not Hunter Dickinson, Kofi Coburn of Illinois is now the most dominant returning basketball player in our league. So he declared for the draft and then put his name in the transfer portal. Everybody had written off that he was done at Illinois because they've had quite the exodus of coaches and other people there this offseason. But now he's announced he's returning back with the Illini. And that is quite literally, Aaron, a huge addition for Brad Underwood.
That's an understatement. That's an understatement. He is one of the few, I would say, he's one of the few centers that doesn't really have an outside game that the offense can still flow through. You see what I'm saying? He's one of the few, because most of the time centers, you got to have some sort of an outside game as well, kind of like a Luka Garza, to be able to have the offense flow through you. Otherwise, you're just a good piece of the offense, of the offensive game plan, but you still have to have other options on offense to kind of direct the game. He is as strong inside as anybody in probably the entire country. Hunter Dickinson, I would say, is a little bit ahead of him, but he's just up there in that echelon, and that's for the Illini. I would say they're probably number. I think you already put out the rankings. In my mind, they're number 2 behind Michigan, just with this addition coming back next year for favorites in the Big Ten. But Michigan still, I think they're a couple bullet points ahead of everybody else.
All right, we'll come back, play this week's game of Would You Rather here in the Bigger Ten next. That time again, let's play our weekly game of Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. And Aaron, would you rather Jim Delaney was still commissioner of the Big Ten? Or do you think Kevin Warren is up for the realignment redux?
When I first saw this, I was like, oh, definitely Jim Delaney. This is a little bit, not a lot of it, but a little bit harder than it looks, because Jim Delaney, to his credit, at the time, he helped expand the Big Ten's footprint and made just bank for the Purdue's and Indiana and Iowa's, let's be honest, of the world in the Big Ten by expanding the Big Ten's TV footprint. But that's in a different era. That's in the era of cable, as I stipulated earlier in the show. I'm not sure if a guy like Jim Delaney right now would necessarily be able to have the wherewithal to determine the engagement of brands. He probably would. Maybe Kevin Warren, who's a little bit younger, would understand that better. So it's a little bit, I say all that to say it's a little bit harder than it seems on first blush, but I would still go with Jim Delaney just based on the poop show that we saw from Kevin Warren around this time last year.
What about a Barry Alvarez, Kevin Warren dual package over Jim Delaney back?
There is business smart, which Jim Delaney has, and then there's street or football smart, which I think Barry Alvarez has to a T, even though he's got the professionalism there. I'm just saying, in the brawling mindset, the football coach mindset,
there's a chutzpah there, you're saying.
Exactly.
I hear you.
I would still take Barry Alvarez over Kevin Warren. This one's for you. Would you rather be Penn State or Nebraska in this round of college football musical chairs?
I would much rather be Penn State, because I think I have options. I think I've got a chance to go, and depending on what the state of the Florida State program is, I mean, historically, if I went to the ACC, I am the number 1 historical football brand in that league. Clemson's the number 1 brand right now, but their history in Penn is nowhere close to Penn State's. Florida State's history is nowhere close to Penn State's. It's just their recent history is vastly superior to Penn State's, right? So I could do that, or is there something I want from the Big Ten? Is out of division's gone. You know what I'm saying? Is there something I've long wanted from the Big Ten that would give me some kind of a consideration in order to stay? I mean, if I'm Penn State, the worst I'm going to do is remain in the Big Ten. I'm going to do no worse than that. Do I think the odds are high this would happen, what I'm about to say? No. But do I think they're 0? No. I mean, if the Big Ten's presidents just decided, man, we're going to the mattresses for our AU programs, so we're going to protect them all from the SEC and make sure they make as much money on athletics as possible. So we're kicking out Nebraska and bringing Iowa State and Kansas in, along with our AAU schools from the ACC. I mean, would that totally shock you if the Big Ten did that?
No.
I don't predict it would happen.
Based on Nebraska's schedule for the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years,
yeah,
it wouldn't surprise me that they're on somebody's bleep list over at the
schedule
office.
the Big Ten gave them last year after they ran their mouth.
Yep.
Hell, the schedule they're playing the second half of this year, if you've looked at it, okay? So I'll never forget the Big Ten Network introductory show with announcing Nebraska and their new schedule and the look on Tom Osborne's face. Now, this is a guy that was no shrinking violet as a football coach. He had this look like, yeah, man, we're going to be firing everybody with this schedule they gave us. All right. I wouldn't predict it, but I don't think it's like 5% that could happen either. Probably somewhere 10 to 20%. But that's a hell of a lot more odds than Penn State has of ending up anywhere worse than the Big Ten. So I'd much rather be Penn State.
All right.
For you, would you rather implement Ryan Day's Share the Wealth NIL redistribution plan to lesser players, or just make it every athlete for themselves? What you make is yours, period. And I'll say, this is like the first mistake I believe Ryan Day has made as a head coach.
Yep. Openly
verbalizing this. At the level Ohio State needs to recruit at to reach its goals, I can promise you, man, Nick Saban, hey, Bryce Young just has $1 million. He hasn't started a game yet. I'm not giving his effing money to the third string right guard. What the hell's Ryan Day talking about, right? I was surprised to hear, even if you think it, to come out and say, yeah, I think maybe we should take some money from players that are making it and give it to the players that aren't. I thought that was the first Ryan Day misstep of his 3 years in the Big Ten here so far.
Agree for similar, not exactly same reasons. So I would say I'd rather have every athlete kind of make what they want. If they decide they want to say, hey, I'm taking out my offensive lineman for supper if you're the quarterback, or I'm going to take my cornerbacks out because they're making me better by covering my wide, or whatever. That's on them. But I would say this is maybe something to watch just a little bit, because it tells me that Ryan Day doesn't really understand this entire concept of NIL very well. Not sure how that could manifest itself in the locker room, but it tells me that he hasn't thought through it all the way. So that might be something to watch in the future.
You're Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. You're like, you tie them with my money, coach. I mean, you're making $8 million a year. Why don't you spread some of that wealth to the student managers and the analysts making $40,000 a year? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just kind of thought, for a guy that so far has done like everything perfectly, maybe all we learned is Ryan Day is a human being. After all, he's more than a machine. He's not just a machine.
That's a good point. Final one is for you. Would you rather have Iowa State or North Carolina in the Big Ten? I know the scenarios that we've talked about, maybe both could it, but if it came down to one of those two schools, which would you take?
Well, some of you know I used to own an Iowa State fan magazine in another lifetime, and I still have a lot of connections and friends at Iowa State. But this is Bigger Ten. And if I'm making decisions on what's best for the Big Ten, this is a no-brainer. I'm getting the superior academic school. I'm getting a school with a superior fan base. The basketball thing is a great bonus, but I mean, the Big Ten's already at an elite basketball level. And I'm also opening up a key recruiting region as more and more of the country moves south. And my recruiting base begins to more and more erode. I need some manifest destiny as a Big Ten conference and expanding our recruiting territory, right? And so I mean, North Carolina just checks way more boxes than Iowa State does, unfortunately. I kind of think it's a no-brainer. If I'm not, if I forget that I have friends at Iowa State, that I've known so many people there over the years, if I forget that and just look at it analytically, this would not even be a debate, probably.
Well said.
All right, we'll come back. It's our Twitter poll results, and then the feedback of the week is next. This week's Twitter poll results: should the Big Ten expand in response to Texas and Oklahoma bolting for the SEC? 62% of you said no. 21.5% of you said only for Notre Dame. I'm sorry, 62% of you said yes, my bad. 21.5% of you said only for Notre Dame, and 16.6% said no. Aaron, what do you think of those results? Results, I should say in English.
I think that's fairly. I think that's a fairly.
I thought only for Notre Dame would actually be bigger.
Yeah, I thought it would be at most maybe 60-30. I voted for no because I want homeostasis and I want things to kind of stay the same. I don't know. I don't even know how 28 going on 88, I guess, or 78. But I thought maybe it would be a little bit more for only Notre Dame. But it makes sense. I mean, the vast majority, over 80%, 83.5% there, they say, yeah, you got to respond in kind. And if it is fait accompli, then yeah, you've got to do that if you want to stick around in this sport. So it's not super surprising.
Okay. Our feedback of the week comes from Doug Griffiths, who says there's no way they would never pass up Big Ten revenue, talking about Penn State potentially leaving the Big Ten according to the Michigan rival site, the Wolverine. He says, according to USA Today, the Big Ten reported more than $780 million in revenue, the most of any other conference. The ACC revenue was $455 million. You make good cases there. But what if the ACC, what if ESPN says to the ACC, hey, if you bring in the Big Ten, we'll pay you that kind of money, because it gives us more leverage to potentially add Notre Dame then as the 16th team to your league. What if they say to Penn State, hey, we'll give you a disproportionate share? Because Penn State would walk in with the largest fan base, the largest stadium, the largest television footprint, and the largest living alumni body in the ACC by far, day one. What if the ACC says, yeah, you come in the first few years, you don't have to do an equitable revenue share, but you get to split it with a 60-40 instead, right? Those are things that get in when you start getting involved in negotiations that maybe could change the calculus a little bit.
Yeah, and there's what we've learned, if anything, with the exception of today's news necessarily about perhaps throwing a chink in the arm, all of this is about money and greed.
Yep.
Which is disappointing. Not surprising, but disappointing. Very little about this has been about competitive advantage or distribution or parity at any level, except for when it comes to the back wallets of a few people. So that's disappointing, and it's kind of a dour note to change this on. But I think you did do a good job of kind of illustrating how these negotiations the carrot and stick of some of these things can actually play out.
And it's not just that they're about money, it's that they're like only about money.
Yeah.
They add nothing else other than money, which means if it only is about money, then you're taking away from everything else, right? If it was about other things other than money, then it would at least amplify those things too. It would improve those things too. But since it's just about money, this isn't capitalism now. This is just greed. This is money for money's sake. And now you get into a situation where everything else suffers in order to acquire more money. At what cost? We're about to find out. I think the Big Ten's going to determine what that cost is, and we'll find out what they think it is here in the next few weeks or months. Aaron, great stuff. Thank you again to all of you for joining us here on our first weekly broadcast of a new season here on Bigger Ten. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, follow, whichever the case may be, on however you access this show each week, whether it's right here on YouTube or iTunes or Stitcher, Google Play, etc. Please keep those things coming, especially the positive reviews. They certainly seem to help us grow the show as well. You can keep up with what we think about all things Big Ten and more by following us on Twitter @Bigger10. Until the next time, I'm Steve Deace here with Aaron McIntyre, back next week on Bigger Ten.